topic we have today is Maaseh Shabbos. And this is an interesting example. Many times I mention what Chazal say, Divrei Torah aniyim b'mukom echad v'ashirim b'mukom achar. Maaseh Shabbos is a sugya which we do not find in Masechet Shabbos, which would be a surprise. Masechet Shabbos is the second biggest Masechet in Shas. It's 156 pages. Not even one line regarding, or a sugya regarding Maaseh Shabbos. Beyond that, Maaseh Shabbos is not on Seder Moyed. Maaseh Shabbos is mentioned twice in Shas, Seder Noshim and Seder Nezikin. That would be somewhat of a surprise. Ksubas Lamed Aleph and Bava Kama Ayin Aleph. That is the nature of Shas. That is the nature of so in the modern world, we are used to systematic, teaching, Seder. But sometimes what we teach has more Seder than substance. So all the substance of Torah Sheba'al Peh is in Shas, but it is not really organized in the way we would organize a curriculum. So the sugya of Maaseh Shabbos is twice in Shas. Ksubas Lamed Aleph, Bava Kama Ayin Aleph, and a Machlokes Tanoim. According to Rabbi Yochanan Sandler, we're dealing with a dioraisa. So if a person does a malacha on Shabbos, he cannot have any benefit from that malacha, and this is a din dioraisa. Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda both maintain it's not a din dioraisa, it's knas. Kansu chachamim. If a person does a malacha on Shabbos, he should have no benefit and no revach from that malacha. And the machlokes of Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is to what extent, exactly what were chachamim geizer. According to the Meir, if a person did a malacha b'shoigeg, there is no prohibition at all. The person that did the malacha, kal v'chomer, others could have benefit from the malacha immediately, Shabbos, and kal v'chomer mitzvah Shabbos. If he did a malacha on Meized, then everybody needs to wait for Motzei Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos, mutar lakol. That's the opinion of Rav Meir, which is the more lenient opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, also malacha b'shoigeg. The person that did the malacha can have no benefit and no hanoah until Motzei Shabbos. Meized, he could never have benefit from that malacha. Needless to say, on Shabbos, even Motzei Shabbos. A mevashel b'Shabbos, if he's mevashel b'Meized, he could never eat that food. Others need to wait till Motzei Shabbos. Some of you probably are asking yourself, Motzei Shabbos, is it mutar miyad? What about b'chdei sheyasa? So this is somewhat confusion. B'chdei sheyasa is only if a goy did a malacha for you. So it's an interesting point. If a Jew did a malacha for you, it's mutar Motzei Shabbos miyad. If a non-Jew did a malacha for you, you need to wait b'chdei sheyasa. And at some point in today's shiur, we'll get back to this. But first, I want to give the fundamentals regarding the machlokes Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda Maaseh Shabbos. Most of the Rishonim, most notably the Rif, Rambam, Perek Vav Halacha Chav Gimel, Hilchos Shabbos Kamuvan, Shulchan Aruch and the Tur, Shin Yud Ches Sif Aleph, they maintain Halacha Ke Rav Yehuda, which is the more stringent opinion. Shoigeg, person that did the malacha cannot have benefit till Motzei Shabbos. Meized, the person that did the malacha could never have benefit. Others need to wait till Motzei Shabbos. Tosfos in Ksubas maintains halacha ke Rav Meir. That's the more lenient opinion. Shoigeg mutar miyad lekulam, for everyone. Meized mutar for everyone. Motzei Shabbos. The Gron Shein Yud Ches disagrees with the Machava and the Ramo, and the Gro Paskins, like Tosfos, more lenient opinion, halacha ke Rav Meir. Mishnah Brura Shein Yud Ches Siv Zayin. The Mishnah Brura says, "B'mokom hatzorech, one could rely on the Goen," which is a chiddush against the Shulchan Aruch, against the Ramo, against the Noisei Kalim. So the Mishnah Brura says one could rely on the Goen. We never really had an analysis about the relationship between the Mishnah Brura and the Goen. But anybody that's familiar with the Mishnah Brura knows that the Mishnah Brura was an extreme chassid of the And even though he usually wouldn't ask in accordance to the Goan against the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, but many times it's the way he leans, as we learned from his sprach. So in this case, regarding Maaseh Shabbos, Mishnah Berurah says, one could rely on the Goan. But the Mishnah Berurah stresses that is only regarding shoygeg. In most cases, halacha l'maaseh, when we deal in Maaseh Shabbos, our problem is the maze that are the shoygeg. It's very uncommon in our day and age, a person that does a malacha b'shoygeg. Shoygeg is either he's not aware that the malacha is asur, or he's not aware that it's Shabbos. So it's very unreasonable in our day and age. A person doesn't know it's Shabbos. Everybody knows the date. Everybody knows the days of the week. And it's also very uncommon that a person wouldn't know what's a malacha. So yes, could be a non-from person, but that is not really very nogeya halacha l'maaseh. The Chazon Ish disagrees with the Mishnah Berurah, and the Chazon Ish says we cannot stray from the Shulchan Aruch, from the Ramah, from the Rambam, and there is no room for leniency. Afilu b'shatz tzorech. That's the opinion of the Chazon Ish. Siman Lamed Zayin, Schof Tes, Chazon Ish, Kamuvan Orachai. So in the Gemara, we find the concept of Maaseh Shabbos only by. I apologize for my cough. Sounds worse. Happy? It sounds worse. Happy? No. Water. Sounds worse than it is. I feel well, but this is somewhat of an allergic irritation. Baruch Hashem, I'm okay. But the cough is very irritating. So in the Gemara, we find Maaseh Shabbos only in the context. Not soda, only water. Only in the context of bishul. Does it apply to other malachas as well? Generally, yes. And the lashon of the Rambam Perek Vav Melech Shabbos is Weiss malacha. So the Gemara on both sources deals with bishul, but the Rambam formulates Maaseh Shabbos Weiss malacha b'Shabbos, and the Ramah in Shin Yud Ches Yifalef clearly speaks about ner. So if a person put on the light. So in the days of the Shulchan Aruch, we didn't have electricity, but a person lit a candle. He put on the light. You cannot use that light to read or to do anything, or haner. So in the Shulchan Aruch, in Ramah as well, the Rambam speaks generally. So the other example of a specific malacha is hamadlik es haner. Does it refer to all the malachas? No. So the Mishnah Berurah, Bi'alocha, the beginning of Shin Yud Ches, brings the machlokes that are shown regarding hoitzah. If a person was moitzi mershus l'rshus, he brought food from Rishus Harabim to Rishus Yochid. Could he eat it in Rishus Yochid? Would that be defined as Maaseh Shabbos? Some Rishonim maintain, no. The common denominator, the tzad shova, between Hadlokas Haner and Bishul is a malacha beguf hadavar. Without the malacha, there would be no light. Without the malacha, this food would not be edible. It wouldn't be fitting for consumption. But without malacha satzah, you still would have the food. You still could eat it. There rather than here. The question is just where. So this of Maaseh Shabbos applies only when there's a shinui beguf hadavar. And if you have benefit from this malacha, you are deriving direct benefit, which you could not have unless a Jew, a Yid, was Machal Shabbos. That is not the same regarding Hoitzah, because I could eat this food, whether it's here or there. So I would need to make some tercha and go out to another house instead of this house. So some Rishonim maintain regarding it. So there is no Isser of Maaseh Shabbos. Chai Odom, quoting the Bialocha, says, Me'ikar adin, one could be Mekel. I didn't do the count, but I think most of the Rishonim maintain that by so there would be no Isser of Maaseh Shabbos. Chai Odom, quoted in the Bialocha, says, Me'ikar adin, one could be Mekel. Biafar pekenra ui lahachmir. So the Prima Godim has an interesting formula. And the Prima Godim says, Maaseh Shabbos is only what you did cannot be turned back, cannot be undone. So the Prima Godim is a Shin Yud Tes regarding boiler. If a person did boiler on Shabbos, wouldn't be osor la'achar Shabbos, even if he did it on Mezid for himself. So by Bishul, by Lukas Aner, the halacha is Lamisha Chilas a Shabbos b'Mezid. It's also Oilomis. He could never eat that food, but it is different. So the Pri Megadim says, even after you did boiler, you could mix the pseudus and the yoichel together again, and you could undo what you did. So it's not reasonable. It would be osali olam, because if I could undo and do it again, I'm not really deriving direct benefit out of Chilul Shabbos. So that is the formula of the Pri Megadim, which is slightly different than what we find in the Rishonim. They're mechalek between malacha begufa dovar and malacha, which is just transferring from one domain to the other. That's as far as that applies to Hoitzah. Regarding Boiler, it is begufa dovar, it's a malacha begufa dovar, but on the other hand, Bishul cannot be undone. Havora can't be undone. You could put out the candle and light it again, but that's not undoing the Havora you did. Because the shemen that was consumed by the ner and the light that was brought forth by your malacha cannot be taken away. It cannot be undone. You could put out the candle and light it again, but you cannot undo what was done. Masha enkein baboida. So the discussion to what malachas does Maaseh Shabbos apply is a big discussion. What we find in the Gemara's Bishul, what we find in Ramah's Adlokas Haner, but maybe it doesn't go much beyond the two, because the tzad hashava between the two is this is something begufa dover, and what you did cannot be undone. And this brings us to a very fundamental question, because the Rambam clearly says that Maaseh Shabbos is also b'achila mutar b'hanoah. Hamavashal b'Shabbos, even b'Mezid, could never have benefit out of that bishul. He can never eat this food, even Matzah Shabbos, but he could sell it to others. Maaseh Shabbos also b'achila v'lo b'hanoah. So what about ner? Hadlokas a ner. We're dealing with hanoah. So the answer is a very simple one. The difference between eating and selling is not this is achila and that's hanoah. We're not dealing with the concept of isura achila and isura hanoah. Generally speaking, the entire range of macholas asurais, we have two different categories of macholas asurais. Some macholas asurais are also bein b'achila, bein b'hanoah. Which ones? Everybody should know. Well, basa b'cholav la'alocha, also bein b'achila, bein hanoah. Orla, kilei akerem, also bein b'achila, bein b'hanoah. Many macholas asurais are also b'achila mutar b'hanoah. Navelis, treifis, minim tameim, achela v'hadam. These are also b'achila, not b'hanoah. But in Maaseh Shabbos, the defining factor is not achila or hanoah, but rather we're dealing with a knas. And therefore, Chazal asked the primary reason. What did you want to achieve by doing this malacha? So when a person cooks, he cooked hoping to eat that food. So it's enough that we counsel them, you can't eat. You could never eat this food, but you could sell. Because that wasn't the reason he cooked that food. But when you put on a ner, you never intended to eat the light. The only reason a person puts on a candle is to enjoy the light. So by Maaseh Shabbos, Chazal always answered to derive the benefit which you intended to derive by performing this malacha. So according to this hesber, if you cook food on Shabbos on a commercial basis, not for yourself, but you cooked food because you want to sell that food, Motzei Shabbos, you cannot sell that food. Just like if you put on a ner, you cannot enjoy the light of that very same ner. So first we shared the fundamental halachas regarding Maaseh Shabbos. What is the Yesor? Rameh Rav Yehuda, halacha ke Rameh, halacha ke Rav Yehuda. Could we rely on the lenient opinion, the Machlokes Mishnah Berurah and Chazon Ish? And then we spoke about other malachas, because in the Gemara, all we find is bishul. So bishul and ner are the same. Right, so it's different. Maybe even boiler would be different. And now let us examine, why is it that when a guy does a malacha for a yid, it's also b'chdei shiyasa. When a yid does a malacha, mutar b'mitzvah Shabbos, you don't have to wait b'chdei shiyasa. The entire reasoning of b'chdei shiyasa, Shabbos Kuf Chav Beis, and also a Masechet Beis, a Machlekes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. According to Rashi, shelo yehena memalachas Shabbos. Chazal didn't want a person to derive any benefit from malacha that was done for a Jew on Shabbos. Rabbeinu Tam says, Gzeira shemeyoy marloi. If we will permit people having benefit from what a guy does on our behalf for Shabbos, it's a slippery slope. Then tomorrow people will tell a guy to do a malacha for them, and that's Amir al-Nachri, which is an Issa D'Rabbanan. So if the reasoning is Shemeyoim Aloi, we could understand the difference between a guy and a Jew. Amir al-Nachri is the Shvus Hakal B'Yoisar. In Erev and Samaches, it is defined Shvus She'en Bo Maaseh. By Amir al-Nachri, the Jew does nothing. He just talks. It's the guy doing the malacha. So Be'enei B'nayodam, people aren't that nizar in Amir al-Nachri. And therefore, Chazal were chayshish. If we permit deriving benefit and being nana from malacha that a guy does on Shabbos, then tomorrow the Jew will tell the guy to do a malacha on Shabbos. But if we permit him to take benefit out of what a Jew does for him, we're not afraid he's going to tell a Jew to do a malacha, because everybody understands that that's a grave transgression. That's a big avera. And the Magen Avraham and the Taz have two different signoinus, nuances. Why aren't we afraid if we permit a person to derive benefit from Meleches Yisrael b'Shabbos? Why shouldn't we be chayshish that a day later, next Shabbos, he's going to tell a Jew to do the malacha? Magen Avraham and Taz have two signoinus. One is because people know that asking a Jew to do a malacha Shabbos is a terrible avera. It's lifnei yevelo sit mechshel. It's an issa d'oraisa. Amir al-Nachri is only an issa d'Rabbanan. So one derech is we're not afraid he's going to tell a Jew to do a malacha. The other derech is he might tell the Jew to do a malacha, but it's unlikely that the Jew will do a malacha because he's a Yid. Jews aren't machal Shabbos. According to Rashi, no, it's just because a Jew should never be nehana from Chilul Shabbos. So according to Rashi, if a guy does a malacha for a Jew, we say he needs to wait b'chdei sheyasa. It should be a kal v'cholim. If a Jew did a malacha, of course, this is the real thing. A guy does a malacha on Shabbos, and I tell you that's not a problem at all. He's not mechuyev in Shabbos. So if we aser b'chdei sheyasa mitzvah Shabbos because a Jew shouldn't benefit from Chilul Shabbos of a guy, kal v'cholim, he shouldn't benefit of Chilul Shabbos from a Jew. Rashi doesn't explain that, but the Rosh does. So before I mentioned that Maaseh Shabbos is in Seder Noshim and Seder Nezikin, this has verses in Seder Kodshim. Rosh, Perek Kamim, Masechet Chulin, Siman Yutes, the Rosh says. For a Jew to do a malacha on Shabbos for another Jew is a milsa de l'shchicha. Milsa de l'shchicha lo yigazro barabanan. What would be the nafka minas between these three different approaches, not two? Rashi says, b'chdei sheyasa shelo yehena mechilul Shabbos. Rabbeinu Tam says no. Cheshash, shemeyoim ala goy. Why aren't we cheshash shemeyoim in Yisrael? Magen Avraham and Taz. Because the Yisrael wouldn't listen to it. The other interpretation is he wouldn't dare to ask Yisrael to do so. Nafkamina b'mumar. And that's a discussion of the Prima Godim and many other Achroim. How do we deal with the Mumar Chalat Shabbos? Does he have the din of a goy and we need to wait b'chdei sheyasa mitzvah Shabbos? Or no? After all, he's Jewish. If he's Jewish, Motzei Shabbos miyad la'acherim. We don't have to wait b'chdei sheyasa. So the Prima Godim cheshbons the sugya. According to the Rash, Milsa de Reshchicha, to our dismay, a Mumar is not such a Milsa de Reshchicha. Going back 200 years, maybe it was a Milsa de Reshchicha. You know, people aren't aware. Until 300 years ago, or slightly less than 300 years, there was no secular Jewry. Organized secular Jewry is a modern concept. There always were Mumarim. Usually, they were converts to Christianity, to Islam, and that was very, very common throughout the Gullus, to our dismay, in different societies, in different countries. So they weren't Jewish. They left the fold. There were always Yechidim, Apikosim, but there was no organized secular Judaism till Moshe Mendelssohn, till the Reform movement, the Haskalah. So it's a relatively modern concept. But in the days of the Prima Godim, he already is Mesupik. So Mumarim aren't that uncommon. So maybe it is more of a Milsa de Shchicha. So according to Rashi, maybe Yisrael Mumar, we do need to wait. If the reasoning is a Jew wouldn't be machshel another Jew, even Yisrael Mumar, we don't need to wait b'chdei sheyasa. But if the reasoning is I might ask him to do a malacha, but it's unlikely that he will do a malacha, then regarding a mumar, we should wait b'chdei sheyasa. So this is an interesting discussion with many tzdodim lakan, as I just explained. Are we makel or machmir? Like in many other areas, I saw some sforim quoting in the name of Rav Elyoshev that we need to be machmir. However, in Kovetz Shuvas, which are the original Shuvas Rav Elyoshev wrote, Chelik Beis Machof Aleph, he's makel. So obviously, the case of a mumar, yeah, case of a mumar. So, as in many other cases, the real Rav Elyoshev sometimes is a bigger makel than the one that's quoted, the virtual Rav Elyoshev. So this is a big shaila, and I think, bearing in mind that we paskin that Maaseh Shabbos is derabanan, not a dioraisa, and there are tzdodim lakan elachan, b'shas tzorech, one could be makel, but let's hope there should be no shas tzorech at all, and people shouldn't be Machal Shabbos, so we definitely lechatchila should not take benefit when they are Machal Shabbos. However, there are some very, very, very pressing questions regarding Maaseh Shabbos. Not when a person cooks. People that cook on Shabbos are not amongst us, and we usually don't mingle with them, so we don't have the question of a person cooked on Shabbos or he put on an air on Shabbos. But I got on a flight yesterday night, Mitzvah Shabbos, 12:30. A lot of Chilul Shabbos went into that plane. Preparing a plane for flying takes time. People get on a bus, Mitzvah Shabbos, on the way to the Kaisel. And there are thousands of young people in Yerushalayim that get on buses, Mitzvah Shabbos, right after Avdallah. So, well, the driver got on that bus and fueled the bus and organized whatever he needed to organize. And sometimes he left the Tachana before Tzesek Chumim. So, you know, I always see the Tevosan B'Biyofim Shel Yisrael. You know, Eged, buses don't run in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos. But they do prepare the buses before Shabbos is out, definitely before Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. So El Al doesn't fly on Shabbos, but a lot of Chilul Shabbos goes into preparing planes for flight. Would that be a problem of Maaseh Shabbos? So If Goyim do the malacha, that would be somewhat of a problem. If Jews do the malacha, then la'acherim, Matzah Shabbos is mutar miyad. Even if the malacha was intended for those acherim, Yoda Deasim and Tzadik Tes, we go from one area in halacha to another. Ein mevatlin yisrael lechatchila. Bittul barav is a very well-known concept. Miyat isu shenesar baraveter is mutar. Ein mevatlin yisrael lechatchila. People don't know. The source of this sugi is a Mishnah and Trumas, not an Issa Veheter. Earlier source is a Mishnah and Trumas. And if a person was a mevatel Issa lechatchila, also, bein lemevatel ubein lemi shebitel b'shviloi. If I was mevatel Issa to feed others, it's also to those others. That is in Siman Tzadik Tet Siv Hey. Machlok is the Taz and Rabbi Kiva Eiger. Taz Siv Kot Yud quotes the Marshal. It is only of those people that the bittul was performed for their benefit. Al datam, they know, they agreed. They might even ask the person to be mevatel for them. But if it's against their will, then it's mutar lehem. Even though the one that was mevatel for you. But if you express dismay, and you said, I don't want you to do this, then it's mutar. Rabbi Kiva Eiger quotes the Rivash, Shuvas Rivash, Shemet Tzadik Ches, that says no. Even if the other person objects, if it was done for him, it's also. Some Achronim maintain, Maaseh Shabbos, Bittul Issa Lechatchila, same basic rules. Because by both we find Osaloi, Mutar La'acherim. So would they have the same rule? The Magen Avraham Siv Kotten Beis and the Mishnah Berurah Siv Kotten Hey say, Maaseh Shabbos is different than Ein Mevatel Issa Lechatchila. And by Maaseh Shabbos, lo yikonsu elo lemi shebishol b'Shabbos. They didn't answer for anyone else, even though the malacha was performed for that someone else. One definitely could makel when we're sorry. I would prefer to get on a flight 1:30 instead of 12:30. Or 2:30, I needed to rush out of the house. I keep Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam was 9 o'clock. By 10 to 10, I needed to be on my way. And we definitely would prefer if they would start taking care of those planes later, but it's not within our power to impose on them. So by Ein Mevatlin, that would be a machlokes Rabbi Kiva Eiger and the Taz. The Taz, quoting the Mashal, to the Rabbanon, B'shas Adchak one could be makel, especially by Maaseh Shabbos, because according to the Mishnah Berurah, Magen Avraham, Maaseh Shabbos is more lenient than Ein Mevatlin. But Maaseh Shabbos, lo yikonsu elo es hamavashel, v'lo mi shenes vashel b'shviloi. And therefore, I think one could be makel. And that is also the opinion of Chuvas Minchas Yitzchak. So, both Reb Shimon Zalman Auerbach and the Minchas Yitzchak deal with this question of getting on buses Mitzvah Shabbos in Yerushalayim when we know that those buses were prepared. So the Minchas Yitzchak is Mekel. Reb Shimon Zalman also writes Meker Adin Yesh Lahakal. But Reb Shimon Zalman feels this might be somewhat of a Chilul Hashem. Maybe buses are different than planes. Planes, okay, you take a bus, you could wait a half hour later. But, we can take a plane a half hour later. There's not going to be any. What?
The Malach was done by Jews. There was no B'chtei Shiyasa issue.
Yes, but if we say this brings us back to the question of Sol Muma, whether by Muma there is B'chtei Shiyasa. So yes, by Jews basically there is no din of B'chtei Shiyasa. They're going to do it even if from people don't get on those planes, probably. They have their Seder. And so this is not defined as Lifnei Yever when it's not Krei Avred Nahar. And so.
Would the Rav suggest that you actually look for a non-Jewish marriage choice between airlines.
I think the people preparing the planes on all airlines, after all, it's Israel. Many of them are non-Jews. Most of them would be Jews. No difference.
We go by the road.
Yeah, and another svara lahokal would be based on what we said before. Most of the malachas performed in preparing a plane for flight are not begufa dover. It's not like mevashel. It's not like hadlokas anar. They clean the plane. The plane is not changed. They fuel the plane, which is not a tikkun begufa dover. Sometimes they need to do repairs, and repairs would be somewhat more similar. But most of the times they don't need to do repairs. They need to fuel the plane and they need to clean the plane. Those are basically the fundamentals. What? Okay, so this brings us to the other question. So there was a big controversy regarding the Rakeret HaKala. So the situation in Israel is this. You know, once again, many times I speak about this. By far and large, Israeli society is becoming frummer by the day. Demographics are at work. And it's not only demographics. Yes, there is backlash from the left. And obviously, there's going to be a new government, and the front parties will not be part of that government. I, as a Rosh Yeshiva and a Rosh Kollel, I'm worried. I'm worried because probably the funding for Kollel will be cut. I'm very worried. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going bankrupt. By far and large, the trajectory is clear and the handwriting is on the wall. Israel is becoming frummer by the day, and nobody could stop that. So I am worried about the political climate in Israel, but I don't talk politics in public. But what I mean to say is Israel is a Yiddish Medina, fundamentally. However, major construction work on the national level must be performed on Shabbos, because the traffic on Shabbos is 60% lower than it is in the middle of the week. So you can't do major public construction in the middle of the week because that'll totally wreak havoc on the traffic. Shabbos people don't go to work. So many of moving heavy material from one place to the other, most of that stuff is being done on Shabbos. So some of the work on the Rakeret is being done on Shabbos. So some of the Rabbanim said, we could never use that train because of Maaseh Shabbos. People were Mechanel Shabbos, b'mezid, they were very well aware. And according to the opinions, that if they did Chilul Shabbos for us, then it's also for us, then we could never use that train. So in some areas, I say, we need to look for kulas and not for chumas. And when I say look for kulas, what I mean is what Chazal say, koicha de teira odef. There is no such a thing to fabricate kulas if they're not firmly based on halacha, on psak. But in some areas, it's not an Indian to look for chumas. So saying if from people could never use the train, first of all, it's gzeira she'ein lo v'tzibur yochel lamed boi. Knowing human nature, it's a gzeira she'lo v'tzibur lo yamed boi. They won't listen to us, even if that would be the halacha. It wouldn't stand. Wouldn't stand. People use the train like they use the train in the entire world. And I definitely think that they could use the train al pi halacha. So besides of what I mentioned before, many great poskim that maintain Maaseh Shabbos is only l'mi shechilel Shabbos, mi shebishel, mi shedliket hasaner, achere motorim, even though it was done for them. I think einu the moiseh dover she'einu shaloi. And the people that decided to work on Shabbos have no right to prevent us from using that train. So the very first source dealing with this question is the Mogen Avraham Reish Nun Gimel Sivkot Lamed Ches, quoting the Or Zarua. People have maids and servants in their homes. So what happens if my servant cooked my food for me without my permission? I would kick him out of the house if I would see. But he's working in my kitchen and I wasn't sure, and he cooked a meal for me, my food. The Azarua says it's mutar. What is the reasoning? Not clear in Azarua, but Shulchan Aruch Harav on the spot, Reish Nun Gimel Sif Chofei says, Eino the Maaseh B'Shem Shaloi. He has no right to ask my food on me. It's my food. It's not his food. If he decided to cook on Shabbos, how could he ask the food on me? Interesting, Shuben Imre Yosha, Chelek Aleph Simkuf Chav Tes. Imre Yosha was a Meir Arak, one of the greatest poskim in Galicia, pre-Holocaust. And he asks a very fundamental question. I know the Maaseh B'Shem Shaloi is only b'davar shetoli b'machshav. Like Avodah Zorah. Because Avodah Zorah, he bowed down to my object, can't answer, because that's something that's totally belev, totally b'machshava. If he killed my animal, it's still nevela. We can't say I know them b'shen shaloi. If he mixed isur in my heter, we can't say I know them. Factually, you're eating isur. So the man Arak explains, Maaseh Shabbos is always totally b'machshava. Because if you wouldn't do it for me, if you would do it for yourself, then it would be mutar for me. So it's always totally b'machshava. The fact that he did it for me, that renders the isur. And therefore, eino the Maaseh B'Shem Shaloi. And we find this principle in Shal Shuvas Eis Ranon, Chelik Beis Or Chaim Simen Hey, Shuvas Mashag, Chelik Beis Kuf Lamed. So those people that were Machal Shabbos have no right to prevent me from using that train, because trains, like public transportation, every resident, every citizen has the right to use public transportation. It's not private, it belongs to everyone. So even the government doesn't have the right to decide to work on Shabbos and prevent us from getting on the bus and getting on the train. And to me, that's such a push at the svara. So it's not exactly the same as my servant cooking my food in my kitchen, but fundamentally it's the same. Because in every normal city, country, public transportation serves the entire community. And it is intended for everyone. So we have a right to use those trains, and the one that decided to work on Shabbos has no right to prevent us from taking advantage of what every normal human being in any city of the world has the right to use public transportation. So besides all the other svaras, that to me is reason that, yes, Jews and non-Jews were working on those trains. So going back about 20 years, one of the governments in Israel fell. I think it was in the days of Yitzhak Rabin, because the government decided to transfer huge turbines to a power plant on Shabbos. And then there was a vote of non-confidence and the government fell. That goes back many years. Same. So in that case, more room for leniency, because it's hoitzah meshus l'shus, it's just carrying the turbines from one place to the other. Not a shina b'guf davar. So regarding the trains, tzorech yun. But in my opinion, eino dem oisa davar she'eino shaloi. And therefore, even if the government decided to work on Shabbos, they have no right to make that decision and prevent any resident in the city to use those trains. So this is a fascinating sugya, the sugya of Maaseh Shabbos.